78%. That is the number that has haunted professional football for almost 2 decades. 78% of former NFL players either bankrupt or drowning in financial stress within 2 years of their last snap. 2 years, not 20, not 10, 2. And when that statistic first landed in a Sports Illustrated investigation back in 2009, the sports world treated it like a curiosity, a headline, something to shake your head at during a commercial break. But sit with it for a second. If 4 out of 5 people in any other profession lost everything within 24 months of leaving the job, we would not call that a personal failure. We would call it a design flaw. We would investigate the industry. We would ask who built this thing and why it keeps producing the same wreckage. Today we are asking exactly that question. Not who spent the money, not who bought the wrong car, but how a machine that generates more revenue than almost any entertainment business on the planet manages to leave so many of the people who generate that revenue with nothing. This is the story of the men who made $100 million and ended up in bankruptcy court. It is the story of the advisors who hunted them, the families who drained them, and the mathematics almost nobody explained to them until it was far too late. And before we get into any of it, one thing to keep in mind throughout. Every earnings figure and net worth estimate you are about to hear comes from public reporting, court filings, and contract databases. These are estimates, not audited statements. The people involved rarely publish their balance sheets, but the patterns are consistent enough that the picture holds regardless of where the decimal point lands. Let's start with the math, because almost every story that follows is downstream of one misunderstanding. When you hear that a player signed for $100 million, your brain does something automatic. It hears $100 million and it stops. It does not hear the structure. It does not hear the years. It does not hear the guarantees, or the lack of them. Odell Beckham Jr. sat down on the pivot and walked through this in detail, and what he described was not a headline. It was a spreadsheet. A 5-year, $100 million deal does not put $100 million anywhere. Between federal taxes at the top bracket, state taxes in whatever jurisdiction the team plays, jock taxes in every away city, agent commissions, and a signing bonus that gets paid early, while the rest trickles across seasons that may or may not happen, the spendable figure lands closer to $12 million a year. $12 million a year still sounds enormous, and it is. But now run it forward. A player who enters the league at 22 and exits at 28 has to make that money survive another 50 or 60 years of life. Not 50 years of modest living, 50 years in which he is expected, by everyone who knows him, to still be the guy who made it. Shannon Sharpe pushed back on that framing publicly, and he had a point worth respecting. $60 million, handled correctly, is generational money. It absolutely can last. But notice what the disagreement is actually about. Sharpe was arguing about capability. Beckham was describing behavior. And the gap between what money can do and what people actually do with it is where this entire crisis lives. Then there is the career itself. The NFL Players Association puts the average career at roughly 3.5 years. 3.5. Most players never see a second contract. They get one signing bonus, one window, one chance to convert athletic ability into permanent capital, and then the phone stops ringing. A running back worth $10 million at 25 is worth $2 million with no guarantees at 32 after the second knee surgery. The market does not negotiate. It simply reprices you. And here is the trap that closes on almost all of them. The lifestyle gets built during the peak. The house gets purchased against the biggest number the player has ever seen. Cars get leased. The staff gets hired. The family gets moved. The friends get put on payroll. All of it calibrated to an income that has a hard expiration date nobody wants to acknowledge. Then the contract ends. The income falls off a cliff, and every single obligation stays exactly where it was. That is the machine. Now let's meet the men who got caught in it. Vince Young was supposed to be the future. He came out of Texas in 2006, having just delivered one of the greatest performances in the history of college football, went third overall to the Tennessee Titans, and signed a rookie deal reported around $58 million with roughly $25 million guaranteed. He was Rookie of the Year. He made the Pro Bowl twice. He could throw from any platform and escape any pocket. This was not a marginal player who never got paid. This was a legitimate NFL starter with real money in the bank. The spending started fast and nobody around him applied the brakes. Reports of $5,000 a week at the Cheesecake Factory. A single tab there that reportedly hit $15,000, which Young later confirmed was the most he had ever spent on one meal in his life. $600 pours of cognac after games, and on at least one occasion, buying out every remaining seat on a Southwest Airlines flight because he wanted the plane to himself. Now, none of that alone bankrupts a man who earned $35 million. What bankrupts him is structure, or the absence of it. Young handed control of his finances to a financial advisor and to his uncle, a former middle school teacher, whom he installed as his manager. That decision is easy to mock from the outside and almost impossible to avoid from the inside. Young came up in Houston with nothing. His uncle was family. In a world where strangers arrive by the dozen the second your name gets called on draft night, family feels like the only safe harbor available. It was not. When Young eventually sat down with a lawyer and combed through his own records, he found his signature, forged on document after document, authorizing loans and deals he had never agreed to. In one instance, $600,000 moved out of his accounts and into a production company he had never heard of. The money did not vanish in a single catastrophic decision. It was extracted quietly, over years, by people close enough to have the access. In 2014, Vince Young filed for Chapter 11. Court documents listed assets between $500,000 and $1 million, against debts running as high as $10 million. Creditors circled his trophies, his cars, and the steakhouse that carried his name. The quarterback who once looked like he might own a decade of the NFL ended up taking an administrative role at his alma mater for a fraction of what he used to make in a single game check. Warren Sapp's story rhymes, but the details are stranger. Sapp was one of the most dominant interior defensive linemen the sport has ever produced. 12th overall pick in 1995, Defensive Player of the Year in 1999, 7 Pro Bowls, a Super Bowl ring with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Career earnings that reporting has placed somewhere between 50 and 80 million, depending on whether you count endorsements and post-career media work. In April of 2012, months before the Pro Football Hall of Fame would enshrine him among the greatest to ever play, Warren Sapp filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. He listed more than $6.7 million in debt against roughly $6.45 million in assets. Read that again. The institution was preparing to immortalize him at the exact moment creditors were preparing to liquidate him. The asset list itself became infamous. 240 pairs of Jordans, a lioness skin rug, signed boxing gloves, a watch, and 2 items conspicuously missing because he reported them lost, his Super Bowl ring and his national championship ring from Miami. But the real story is buried in the monthly expense column. Sapp was still earning well over $100,000 a month at the time of the filing, largely from his NFL Network analyst work, and of the roughly $111,000 going out every month, more than $75,000 was alimony, child support, and related obligations. He owed the IRS $853,000 from 2006 alone. His network wages had been garnished for nearly a year straight. Sapp himself put it bluntly when asked why he filed. He said the choice in front of him was bankruptcy or jail, because falling behind on child support is not a civil inconvenience. It is a criminal exposure. That is a detail almost nobody factors into these conversations. High earnings do not just create obligations. They create obligations calculated against peak income that do not automatically recalculate when the income disappears. The court order was written for the version of you that made $12 million a year. Nobody tells the court when that version dies. Clinton Portis is where this stops being about spending habits entirely. Portis rushed for nearly 10,000 yards across 9 seasons with Denver and Washington and earned north of $43 million. He was introduced to a financial advisor named Jeff Rubin by a former Miami teammate. Rubin was registered with the NFL Players Association Financial Advisor Program. So was Janesh Brahmbhatt, another advisor Portis eventually worked with, whose resume included time at Stratton Oakmont, the firm that inspired The Wolf of Wall Street. Registered, approved, vetted, at least on paper, by the players' own union. Portis described the dynamic in a way that should be printed and handed to every rookie who walks into a locker room. He said, "They arrive impressive. The complication starts because you do not understand what they are telling you, and you get involved anyway. Tailored suits. Terminology you cannot parse. Confidence you assume must be earned. Rubin steered Portis into a $1 million investment in an electronic bingo casino in southern Alabama called Country Crossing. He was not alone. According to filings, roughly 35 NFL players poured as much as $43.6 million into that project. Terrell Owens, Plaxico Burress, Santonio Holmes, Santana Moss, Javon Curse, Fred Taylor. In January of 2010, weeks after the doors opened, Alabama authorities raided the property and seized the machines. Money evaporated. Worse, gambling investments violated league policy, meaning the players were exposed twice over. Then it got darker. Lawsuits filed by Portis between 2011 and 2013 alleged that Rubin's operation opened a bank account in Portis's name using a forged signature, and that more than $3.1 million was withdrawn without his knowledge. Separately, players advised towards Success Trade Securities, run by another Stratton Oakmont alum, saw roughly $14 million in athlete investments disappear into what regulators determined was a Ponzi scheme. Portis filed for bankruptcy in 2015. By some accounts, he had about $150 left in his bank account. The men he held responsible lost their licenses. None of them went to prison. Their money was gone, so a lawsuit was pointless. And that combination, total loss, zero accountability, pushed him somewhere he has since spoken about openly. C. Across multiple nights, armed, waiting for one of the men he blamed. He has said a friend, a television producer with training in family therapy, talked him down. He has also said that if he had seen the man before he cooled off, the interview would have been conducted from a prison. That is what this actually costs. Not just the money, the years, the rage, the person you almost became. If this is the kind of breakdown you want more of, the mechanics, the paperwork, the actual architecture of how wealth gets built and how it gets stolen, go ahead and hit that join button below and become a channel member. Members keep this operation running and keep these deep dives coming. Now let's keep going, because the next two names show you that even elite earners are not safe. Terrell Owens made approximately $80 million across 15 seasons. He is fifth all-time in receiving touchdowns. He is in the Hall of Fame. And by his own account, he watched nearly all of it disappear. Owens bought homes and condominiums on the assumption that if things ever got tight, he could rent them out. Then 2008 happened. The housing market collapsed, tenants did not materialize, and he was reportedly carrying close to $750,000 a year in mortgage payments on properties he could not offload without eating enormous losses. One home purchased for around $3.9 million, sold at a loss of more than $1.7 million. He also had that $2 million in the Alabama bingo project, and he was carrying a child support obligation, reported around $44,600 a month. What Owens said afterward is more useful than any number. He explained that he had simply assumed his agent and his financial advisor would look after him while he focused on being the best football player he could be. That was the arrangement as he understood it. You handle the football, we handle everything else. And he has said plainly that he hates himself for letting it happen, that he believed people had his back, and that in the end, they took from him. He also took ownership of his part in it, not smart enough about his own situation, not responsible enough to stay on top of it. That admission matters, because the honest version of this story is never purely victimhood and never purely recklessness. It is almost always both, tangled together, in a man who was 24 years old and trained his entire life to trust the coaching staff. And then there is Adrian Peterson, whose situation is the most instructive of all, because he is not some cautionary tale from a bygone era. This is recent. Peterson earned more than $103 million in salary alone across 15 seasons. League MVP in 2012. Fifth all-time in rushing yards, a first-ballot resume, and in September of 2024, a Houston judge ordered him to turn over assets to satisfy a debt estimated at more than $12 million, with constables instructed to accompany the court-appointed receiver to his home outside Houston. The origin was a $5.2 million loan taken out in 2016 to consolidate other debts. He defaulted within months. That default became an $8.3 million judgment in 2021, and interest and attorney's fees pushed the total past $12 million. Peterson's representatives have said the loan stemmed from a business arranged by his then financial advisor, a company Peterson co-owned and, as majority owner, personally guaranteed. Which means the collateral was him. Look at the timeline, because this is the part people miss. Peterson made roughly $25 million combined in 2015 and 2016, then $3.5 million in 2017, a little over $1 million in 2018, $2.5 million in 2019, $1.1 million in 2020, just over $300,000 in his final season. That is not a career winding down. That is a cliff. He signed the guarantee during the $25 million a year version of his life and had to service it during the $300,000 version. So why does this keep happening? Because it is not 5 separate stories. It is one story with 5 casts. Start with the education gap, which is enormous and largely manufactured. Most of these men grew up in households where the financial curriculum was survival. Nobody at the kitchen table was explaining asset allocation or the difference between an appreciating asset and a depreciating one, because there were no assets. Then at 22, a wire hits for more money than everyone they have ever known will earn combined, and the expectation is that they will simply know what to do with it. Nobody is born knowing how to steward $10 million. It is a skill. It has to be taught. And the league that profits from these men has historically invested far more in teaching them to protect a football than to protect a balance sheet. Then there is the predator class, and I want to be precise here. The men who took Clinton Portis's money were not strangers lurking in parking lots. They were credentialed. They were on an approved list. Portis's own observation about this cuts to the bone. He has said he stopped wearing suits, because when a man walks in wearing a suit and tie, you assume he is the authority, and you assume he knows more than you. He does not. The costume is the con. Communities that were taught to defer to institutional authority produce clients who defer to anyone who looks institutional. Then there is the family, and this is the hardest section to say out loud. When you are the first person in your bloodline to escape, the escape is never treated as yours. Your cousin needs a job. Your aunt needs the roof done. Somebody's business plan needs seed money. The church needs a new HVAC system. And every single one of those requests is legitimate, which is exactly what makes it lethal. Saying no does not feel like financial discipline. It feels like betrayal of the people who fed you. So the yes gets given, and a yes is never a one-time payment. It becomes a monthly line item, then an expectation, then an entitlement, and finally a grievance, when the income dries up and you cannot deliver anymore. Then there is identity, which is the piece almost nobody prices in. Ron Johnson, who played for Baltimore, Chicago, and Washington before injuries ended his run, described the core problem simply. A lot of guys struggle mentally with who they are supposed to be once the league is done with them. You spend your entire conscious life being the athlete. Every relationship, every room you walk into, every mirror. And then at 28, that is over, and there is no ceremony and no transition plan. So you keep spending, because the spending is the last remaining proof that you were ever that person. The car is not transportation, it is evidence. Put all 4 together: no education, predatory advisors, unlimited obligations, and a psychological crisis nobody treats. And 78% stops looking like a scandal and starts looking like an output. Now, 1 point of intellectual honesty, because this channel does not traffic in convenient numbers. That 78% figure has been challenged. A National Bureau of Economic Research study that examined documented bankruptcy filings rather than the broader category of financial stress found that roughly 16% of players who entered the league in the mid-90s through the early 2000s had filed for bankruptcy within 12 years of retirement. 16 is not 78, but 16% is still catastrophically high for a population that earned millions of dollars, and formal bankruptcy is only the visible tip. It does not capture the men who did not file and simply went quiet. So let's talk about the ones who made it out, because the whole point is the blueprint. Roger Staubach is the ceiling. He won 2 Super Bowls in Dallas and made less than $1 million total playing football. Not per year. Total. So he spent his off-seasons learning commercial real estate, and when his career ended, He built the Staubach Company from nothing into a firm with dozens of offices and more than 1,000 employees. In 2008, he sold it to Jones Lang LaSalle for $613 million, and he had distributed so much equity to his own people over the years that hundreds of employees got life-changing checks out of that closing. Estimates of his personal net worth vary widely across public sources, and again, these are estimates. But no one disputes the shape of it. The football was the platform, not the payday. Tom Brady repeatedly left money on the table in New England, which looked like sacrifice at the time and functioned like an investment. Lower cap hits meant better rosters, meant more championships, meant a brand large enough to support businesses, media, and eventually an ownership stake in an NFL franchise. He traded contract dollars for equity in himself. Russell Wilson treated his playing years as a construction site. Businesses, real estate, endorsement architecture, media positioning, all running concurrently with the football. He caught criticism for how corporate it looked. That criticism has aged poorly, and in the black wealth conversation specifically, the name that towers over all of it is Junior Bridgman, who never made anything close to modern money in the NBA, and who died a billionaire because he bought Wendy's franchises while his peers bought jewelry. Same principle. Different sport. The check is raw material. It is not the destination. Here is the thread connecting every survivor. They stopped treating income as identity and started treating it as inventory. They bought things that produce. They accepted boring for a decade so they could be free for 4. And critically, they built structures, entities, trusts, separated accounts, actual professionals with actual fiduciary duty. Before the money arrived, not after it started disappearing, because that is the real lesson buried under all these bankruptcies. Vince Young did not lose $35 million at the Cheesecake Factory. He lost it because there was no system between his money and the people who wanted it. Warren Sapp did not lose $60 million on sneakers. He lost it to obligations calculated on an income that expired. Clinton Portis did not lose $43 million by being foolish. He lost it to credentialed men operating inside a system that vetted them and never protected him. Money without architecture is just a countdown. So here is what I want to know from you. Of everything we just walked through, the forged signatures, the approved advisors who turned out to be predators, the child support orders written for an income that no longer exists, the family obligations that never end, which one do you think destroys the most careers? Drop it in the comments, because I read them, and this is a conversation worth having in public. Hit that like button if this reframed how you see the 78%. Subscribe if you are new here, because this channel exists to break down the real machinery behind wealth, ownership, and the systems that decide who keeps it. And share this with somebody who needs to hear it, especially if they are young and about to come into money. The check is not the win. The structure around the check is the win. If you want more breakdowns of how athletes, money, and power really work, subscribe and keep building the structure with us. We will see you in the next one.